Scriptures from Daniel 7, verses 1 through 8, 11, and 15 through 18. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream and visions in his mind as he lay in bed. Then he wrote the dream down and related the following summary of it. Daniel said, I was looking in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. And the four great beasts were coming up from the sea, different from one another. The first was like a lion and had the wings of an eagle. I kept looking until its wings were plucked. And it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. A human mind also was given to it. And behold, another beast, a second one resembling a bear. And it was raised up on one side, and 3 ribs were in its mouth between its teeth. And thus they said to it, Arise, devour much meat. After this I kept looking, and behold, another one, like a leopard, which has its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrifying, and extremely strong. And it had large iron teeth. It devoured and crushed and trampled down the remainder with its feet. And it was different from all beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. While I was contemplating the horns, behold, another horn, a little one, came up among them. And 3 of the first horns were pulled out by its roots before it. And behold, this horn possesses eyes, like the eyes of a man, and the mouth uttering great boasts. Then I kept looking, because the sounds of the boastful words which the horn was speaking. I kept looking until the beast was slain, and its body was destroyed and given to the burning fire. As for me, Daniel, my spirit was distressed within me, and the visions of my mind kept alarming me. I approached one of those who were standing by and began asking him the exact meaning of all this. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of these things. These great beasts, which are 4 in number, are 4 kings who will arise from the earth. But the saints of the highest one will receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, for all ages to come.
Today, we're looking at another section of Daniel. Are you guys surprised? Is this a surprise to you guys? Now, what we're going to see today is how the style and the language of the times help us in understanding the style of the times that were written, help us understand the prophecies of Scripture, and also how to bring God's truth into our own context after we have seen what it meant in the times. Why are we doing this? Because Scripture is important enough that every single person needs to know it, understand it, and study it. Every single person in here, in this room, every single person out there in the world, every single person on the earth needs to understand Scripture and apply it. It is that important. Now, when studying any text of Scripture at all, we must remember that we are not the first audience. Other people were the recipients of it. There was no letter from Paul to Nick, okay? Although that would be cool if it worked out that way, it did. But they don't exist. So we need to is adjust our perceptions to theirs and not expect them to conform to our own methods. You guys remember a couple weeks ago when I preached on earlier chapter of Daniel, and we saw the difference between what year of the reign of King Jehoiakim Nebuchadnezzar came in, or what reign of King Nebuchadnezzar he attacked Jerusalem in. And we found out that what it was not our system of dating, but rather, because we think we have a unified system of dating when we don't. And then we went back and saw that they had 2 different systems of dating. One that Jeremiah was using, which was the system from Israel, and one that Daniel was using, which was the system from Babylon. And of course they don't agree. There were 2 different systems. And that's the kind of adjustment I'm thinking about, looking for clues from the times. Now, in addition to that, in studying any text of Scripture, it is necessary to look at the communication techniques used by a culture that the scripture was originally given to. So in addition to understanding your mindset, you have to understand how they communicate. Because if we don't, if you look at this passage, let's look at it really quick for a second. I tried to read the book of Daniel when I first became a believer, and I got to this part and I was like, what the heck? A lion with wings like an eagle, and its wings were plucked, it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and a human mind was also given to it. I was like, huh? What the heck is that? Those are symbols. A lot of this stuff is in symbolism, and to understand the symbols, you have to understand the culture that it was given to. Otherwise, the symbols just seem like farces. So, being a good historian is an important tool in studying Scripture. Now, what this should never, ever, 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 ever do, I'm going to say that again, what this should never, ever, 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 ever do is be used to write off Scripture. And say, well, that was only for that time and in that context. Understanding the times and context are important tools. What it should never do is be used as an excuse to ignore a part of Scripture. And that happens all too often in the church today. Unless the Scriptures are very clear that it's only for a certain time and for a certain people, we should accept it as for all time, because that's the way Scripture is written. Examples of things that Scripture teach are only for certain times and certain people are the food laws for Israel. Guys, remember in the book of Acts when Peter had a blanket full of food laid out for him before God? There was all the illegal foods according to the law, and God said, eat. And 3 times Peter refused, and then God said, don't declare unholy that which I've declared holy. And then, we know that the church is now bound by the food laws. Or temple sacrifices are done away with. That's very clear teaching in Scripture through the entirety of the New Testament. So we don't have to go to the temple and do sacrifices. Those are examples of things that were only for one culture and one time. Okay? But most of Scripture is not like that. Even the things that were for one culture and one time still talk about God's nature and person and glories. And what you do is you look at, this is like a little rabbit trail here, what you do with those is you look at them and see what they say about God, because every single word of Scripture testifies about who God is, what He's like, and what His personality is, and what He cares about. Every single word of Scripture. Now, rather than marginalize God's words, what we should use this tool for is to seek the real meaning of the text. The authors of Scripture intended to say something. It is our job to figure out what they intended to say. And every time I think about this, I know I brought this up last week, that sermon we saw at the First Baptist Church, where the guy gets up and starts preaching in Spanish, and everybody's like, we don't speak Spanish, what's he talking about? Okay, it's different than that. These people were not speaking in our language, but we have tools for understanding what they're saying, and we can use those tools to seek what the authors are actually trying to say. Not put them on the side and say, oh, that was just for other people. That is not the proper way to do it. We need to remember that the living God is sending us messages so that we can better understand Him. Every single word of Scripture testifies, in every single word in the original manuscripts, testify to who God is. And who God is a triune God who cared enough about us, even though we hideously offended Him, to come to earth and make sure that we had a method of getting the right relationship with Him. A God who we offended did that for us. And I think we need to exercise every single talent we have to better understand Him. Every single word testifies about God. Every aspect of God is testified to in every single word of Scripture. That means that Lord can be known from Genesis chapter 1 all the way through the last chapter of Revelation. Every single word of Scripture testifies to the glory of God. Even those boring genealogies do. In the book of Chronicles, with all those names that you can't pronounce, even that. It is our responsibility to receive those messages, remembering who they were given by.